The legend of Aka Manto, or Red Cape, is one of Japan's most chilling urban myths. According to the story, Aka Manto is a ghostly figure who haunts public restrooms, particularly in schools or other isolated places. The spirit is said to appear after someone enters a restroom and is asked a simple but terrifying question: red or blue? The victim must choose between the two, but no matter what they pick, a gruesome fate awaits. Choose red, and the victim will be violently slashed, drenched in blood. Choose blue, and suffocation or strangulation follows. Some versions say that refusing to answer will lead to an even worse death, one that traps the victim in an endless nightmare. It was late in the evening, the kind of late when the city outside was quiet and the only sound was the occasional hum of passing cars. Aiko had stayed after school to catch up on some homework. She had fallen behind in her assignments for the week, and she promised herself tonight would be different. She would finish everything and feel a sense of accomplishment, even if it meant staying in the empty library long after most of her classmates had gone home. By the time she packed up her books and gathered her things, the school felt abandoned. The only light came from the dim bulbs above, casting long shadows across the hallways. Aiko walked down the deserted corridor, the quiet sound of her footsteps echoing against the walls. It was the kind of eerie stillness that always seemed a bit unsettling, but tonight, for some reason, it felt worse than usual. As she neared the school restroom, a strange chill swept over her. Aiko stopped for a moment, feeling a tightness in her chest. It wasn't anything she could put her finger on, just a feeling, something she couldn't quite shake. She told herself it was just the late hour, the isolation. After all, she had passed by the restroom 100 times without a second thought. She hesitated at the door, then pushed it open. The restroom was quiet, almost too quiet. The flickering overhead lights cast a dim glow over the room, and Aiko glanced around nervously. She had always thought the restroom was a little eerie, even in the daylight, but at night the shadows seemed to linger longer. It was almost as if the walls themselves were watching her. She made her way to the last stall in the corner, hoping to be in and out quickly. Aiko was tired, and she wanted to go home. She locked the door behind her and leaned against the cool walls, trying to relax, but that's when she heard it. A voice, soft, almost a faint to hear at first. Red or blue? Aiko froze, her breath catching in her throat. She quickly looked around. There was no one else in the restroom. The silence pressed in, thick and heavy. She stared at the thin strip of light beneath the door, her heart hammering in her chest. Was she imagining things? Had she just heard a whisper, or was someone playing a prank? Red or blue? The voice repeated, louder this time. Her mind raced. She knew the legend, the stories passed around in hushed whispers among classmates. The tale of Aka Manto, the ghost who haunted restrooms, forcing those who encountered him to make a choice between red and blue. Aiko had always dismissed it as just a scary story, the kind of thing you tell to scare your friends late at night. But now, standing there in the dim restroom, she wasn't so sure. She couldn't respond. Her throat was dry, her stomach twisting into knots. The voice seemed to surround her, coming from every corner of the room. It was as if the entire restroom itself was alive, watching her, waiting for her answer. Red or blue? The voice insisted again, growing more urgent. Aiko's hands gripped the edges of the stall door. She had to make a choice, but no matter what she picked, she knew it would be the wrong one. The legend didn't give you a chance to win. There was no way out. She thought of running, but her legs felt frozen. She didn't dare speak. Neither, she whispered, barely able to hear her own voice over the pounding of her heart. For a moment, everything was still. There was no answer, no movement, just silence. But then, the lights above flickered, buzzing erratically. Aiko's breath hitched in her throat as she heard a soft scraping sound from the far corner of the room, like something dragging across the floor. Slowly, she turned toward the noise, but when she looked, there was nothing there. Aiko's mind raced. Was it over? Had she escaped? But then she heard the voice once more, a low whisper that sent a chill down her spine. Run. She didn't think, she just acted. Without hesitation, Aiko flung open the stall door and ran. Her feet pounded against the tile floor, each step echoing in the empty restroom. She didn't look back. She didn't stop until she reached the school's front gates, gasping for air. The cool night air rushed over her, but even that didn't calm the storm in her chest. Her heart was still pounding, and she couldn't shake the image of the dim restroom or the voice that had followed her. She looked over her shoulder once more, half expecting to see the red-clad figure standing in the shadows, waiting. But there was nothing. Aiko didn't speak of what happened to anyone. How could she? Who would believe her? It seemed like a dream, something too strange, too terrifying to explain. She told herself it was over, that she'd escaped whatever force had haunted her that night. But deep down, she knew better. The legend wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The whispers would come again, and next time, she might not be so lucky. Kuchisake-Onna is said to be the ghost of a woman who suffered a gruesome death. The most common version of the story describes her as a beautiful but vain woman married to a jealous and abusive samurai. When he suspected her of infidelity, he flew into a rage and slit her mouth from ear to ear, screaming, "Who will think you're beautiful now?" She died from her wounds, but her spirit lingered, transformed by her pain and rage. My grandmother Akiko was never one to tell tales lightly. She was a pragmatic woman, grounded in reality and quick to dismiss anything that smelled of superstition. Her sharp wit and no-nonsense demeanor made her a respected figure in the family. Yet there was one story she would share, only after a warm cup of sake, with a look in her eyes that could send shivers down your spine. It was a tale from her youth, one she swore was true. The events unfolded on a cold autumn evening in 1957, a night etched into her memory like a scar. At the time, Akiko was barely 19 and working long hours at a textile factory in Nagoya. Her days were filled with the rhythmic clatter of looms and the smell of dye, and her nights were consumed by exhaustion. On this particular evening, she had stayed late to finish an order, long after her co-workers had left. When she finally stepped out of the factory, the streets were eerily quiet, shrouded in a mist that softened the glow of the street lamps. The air was crisp, the kind that made her breath curl in ghostly puffs. She pulled her coat tighter, her small frame almost disappearing into its folds, and quickened her pace. Her footsteps echoed against the narrow alley walls, the only sound in the oppressive silence. It was near a small shrine, nestled in a quiet corner of the district, that she saw her. A woman stood beneath the flickering light of a street lamp, her figure draped in a long red coat that stood out against the muted tones of the night. Her face was partially obscured by a surgical mask, a common sight during flu season. But it was her eyes that caught Akiko's attention, intense, unwavering, and almost hypnotic. The woman's presence was unsettling, but politeness was deeply ingrained in Akiko. She nodded slightly, intending to pass by without incident. "Am I beautiful?" The woman's voice, soft and melodic, stopped her in her tracks. There was a strange undertone to it, something that made Akiko's stomach twist in unease. Startled, Akiko turned to fully face the woman. "Yes," she replied cautiously, her voice steady despite the unease creeping up her spine. What else could she say? The woman's eyes seemed to crinkle in a smile, but there was something unnervingly sharp about her gaze. "How about now?" the woman asked, her hand reaching up to pull down her mask. What lay beneath was a vision of horror. The woman's mouth was grotesquely slit from ear to ear, the jagged edges of the wound glistening as though freshly cut. The skin was taut and unnatural, and though no blood dripped, the sight was visceral and chilling. Akiko's breath hitched, but she did not scream. Fear, yes, but also survival instincts coursed through her veins. She recalled the whispered stories of Kuchisake-Onna, the slit-mouthed woman, a legend that had terrified children and intrigued skeptics alike. Summoning her courage, Akiko replied with measured calm, "You look so." For a moment, the woman froze, tilting her head as though puzzled by the response. The silence was suffocating, each second stretching into an eternity. Akiko seized the moment, bowing slightly. "I'm sorry, but my husband is waiting for me," she said, her tone polite yet firm. She turned and walked away briskly, every muscle in her body tense with the effort of not breaking into a run. Her pulse thundered in her ears, and her legs felt like lead, but she resisted the urge to look back. The stories warned against it, claiming that to look back was to invite the spirit to follow. It wasn't until she reached the stone steps of the shrine that she dared glance over her shoulder. The street was empty, save for the flickering street lamp. When Akiko arrived home, her hands trembled as she lit incense at the family altar. She prayed fervently, her whispers filling the quiet house until the first rays of sunlight crept through the windows. She told no one but her mother about the encounter, fearing that speaking of it aloud might summon the spirit back. Years later, when I was old enough to hear the story, I asked her if she truly believed it had been Kuchisake-Onna. Her expression grew somber, her usually sharp eyes clouded with memory. Whether it was her or a madwoman, I cannot say, she admitted. But something evil walked those streets that night, and I was lucky to come home. Even now, I think of my grandmother's encounter whenever I hear footsteps echoing in an empty street or catch a glimpse of someone wearing a mask in the periphery of my vision. Legends, it seems, have a way of lingering just like the slit-mouthed woman herself.